like beauty in the darkness? Is there something in there that kind of you, or maybe even just some like, some truth that it reveals?
I think this might sound a little morbid, but I think that every story at its core is a horror story. Even if the horror exists and the potentiality of what can go wrong, there's horror in it. And I think that is a truth. And I think that it is not as bad of a thing that people would potentially make it out to be. I don't think that horror is inherently a darkness. So as I said, you have this idea of continuance, that things go on, but if every day of your life has some aspect of horror to it, every day you're also proving to yourself that you can keep going through that horror.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the show where we take drunkenness and tomfoolery to the cosmic level. I am your host and exploding supernova of drunkenness, William R. Hincy, and joining me today, I am really honored and thrilled to have author Vaugh A. Jackson. Vaugh, welcome to the bar.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. And I wanted to say, and I'll link it up here, Future Me Remembers, when we got a chance to meet at the C3 Con, I guess about a month, actually, literally a month ago. I think it was September 14th, I think was the day I was there.
I mean, by so quickly.
I looked at it, I was like, oh man, that's gone. So, but yeah, so we got to have you on the show when we did it live at the convention, me and the lovely Claire. I call her that on all the shows now so that she can be annoyed with me kind of perpetually. She wasn't ready. But yeah, so we got to do the shotgun version of the show, which was really fun. So I was like, oh, I have to get everyone on. It was you and two other authors. I have to get everyone on and do the full, heavy pour of the show. So thanks so much for coming. So let me give you the 10 cent, I guess with inflation, maybe we're looking at the $15 kind of introduction here. But let me give you that so everyone can get to know you. We'll have a full description in the show description here, the full bio in the show description here. So you're author editor, sometimes poet of dark speculative fiction. It usually falls into, I think it's the one or three categories: creatures, kaiju, or cosmic horror. Hence I actually had a better joke in my head that I was going to say with cosmic when we started and flubbed it for whatever reason. Yeah, exactly. Everything escapes me. And you blend a lot of elements of fantasy, sci-fi, horror into an unholy abomination. I just love the term unholy abomination. So I may say it 3 more times this show. You have the book, so it's Up from the Deep and Touched by Shadows. You also published, I know, some poetry and short stories were on there. You're the co-editor of the horror anthology Beyond the Bounds of Infinity, secretary of the Maryland chapter of the Horror Writers Association. And I think it's the book coming up, 2025, that's Southern Cross.
Yep.
That's accurate. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that pretty much covers it. That's where I am right now.
Very good. So I like to start the show kind of proper here with this, getting a sense of where you are in the world. And being with your bio, sometimes I ask what's the best place to get a drink there, and you can certainly ask that. But I wanted to ask, what's the darkest thing to ever happen there?
So the darkest thing that ever happened where I am. So when I was much younger, there was a whole situation where there were these 2 guys going around in this van, and they were actually they were sniping people. They were snipers.
Oh gosh.
And one of the kids that got shot actually went to my church at the time. He survived. So I met him, but he got shot on the grounds of the place that I ended up going to middle school for a year, actually.
Wow, jeez. Is that the I think I remember hearing about that, like the DC sniper, is that what they call it? Yeah, or snipers, I guess it turned out to be, but wow, geez. Yeah, that was a dark moment there, but it was a pleasant. I like to start the show in the most pleasant way possible, as you can see.
Good job, doing a good job there.
I wonder if you can maybe just take us into your author journey leading up to today, like what got you started and where have you been and where are you going?
So my author journey started, I would say, in an official capacity in probably 2015. That's when I sat down and wrote what ended up being the first draft of my novel Touched by Shadows. At the time, it was like a 28,000 word novella that I wrote in response as a way of like kind of processing my emotions about the Baltimore riots at the time, close to my college campus. Actually, like, you could see the smoke and stuff from my campus. So that's kind of, I wrote that, put it away for a while, and eventually my now fiance beat me over the head with it and was like, if you want to do this whole writing thing, you eventually have to come back and edit this and, send it to people. And I was like, really? I didn't know. But the two of us ended up, she helped me, she edited it, that version. I expanded it by, I guess, 30,000 words, and sent it off. And Journal Stone liked it. So I got my first publishing contract.
Very cool. And then what came, so I blanked off the page here and I didn't memorize it. That was Touched by Shadow. So then Up from the Deep was the one that came next?
So that's a funny story, actually. So Touched by Shadows was picked up first. I had the contract signed and everything first. And then December of that same year, I sent out what would come Up from the Deep to Severed Press. And just due to editing stuff and the publishing companies, the ways they worked, Up from the Deep ended up coming out before Touched by Shadows, even though it was my second acquired novel. So Up from the Deep came out in March of 2021, and Touched by Shadows came out, I believe, December 10th of 2021.
That's funny. The publishing company or industry moves at glacial speed. So
sometimes, and then sometimes it's like, oh, we have 2 months later, you're going to publish my book. Okay.
Yeah, I know that's true. When they need it, they expect you to be running full speed. But yes. Otherwise, the industry as a whole is slowly moving. It's kind of like the continents just spreading apart over time.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was kidding with my wife the other day. The book I've been working on, that just finished, Pirates of Appalachia. It's an epic absurdist satire. Right. And it took me 15 years to write. I wrote things in between. I was also working and everything else, but the start to finish was about 15 years. And the last 3 years writing, that was really a full-time kind of writing gig.
Right.
So it was long, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to try to get this thing published now. So reach out to some agents and whatnot and try to go that route. And I'm like, it might take 15 more years for this thing. Let's see the light of day.
And they're like, my general response time is anywhere from 4 weeks to 2 years. And you're like, oh, okay, well,
right.
Guess I was
right. If you haven't heard from me in 2 years, feel free to reach out. Yeah. Thanks so much for that. Awesome. So I wonder that, so you went to college. What did you go to college for?
I went to college for the least writerly thing I could, computer science, actually.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm a software developer / system engineer kind of.
Oh, sure. Very good. I had on Ken Liu, the fantasy author. He's most known in fantasy world for the Dandelion Dynasty. Yeah, and he was a software engineer for a long time. I think that's where he started. I'm trying to remember the episode. I think he started there, and then he went into he became a lawyer and went to corporate law about patents around software.
I will not be doing that because...
Right. I don't like it, but yeah, it's kind of funny when you see the. I like to think of it sometimes as it actually feels good to kind of exercise that other side of the brain. When I had my corporate job up at, I guess it's been 4 months now. It feels like just yesterday, but I was a director for quality regulatory department for medical devices and things. So a very different part of my brain at work. And I was like, it actually kind of feels good sometimes to get away from the free-flowing creative stuff and all of this over here and just be more structured and things. So,
yeah, the way that I kind of describe it is my job is something that I'm pretty good at. I think I'm pretty good at it. I wouldn't necessarily say that I enjoy it. I don't dislike it. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing it if I did. But it's just kind of, it's one of those things, it supports the lifestyle that I want to have, and the goal eventually is to have the writing kind of, take off. So it's, I guess, it is a potentially permanent temporary attempt at working.
Amen. So I wonder that, because the kind of tried and true inspiration question, right? I think sometimes it might be interesting. I think it's generally not that interesting, really. I don't know where half my inspiration really comes from. I'm kind of BSing you, right? It's probably a thousand different things. What I do wonder, though, is when we have people, especially nowadays, right? Modern times, most writers have another gig. And then you hope, just like you were just saying, you hope at some point you can transition over. But that's usually kind of a little later, later on.
Yeah.
But so it's usually something you're like just compelled to do, right? There's like some molten core that is driving you to get back to that, paper, computer, wherever you're writing on. I wonder what that is for you.
I used to always joke that I started writing stories in part because if I made everyone sit down and listen to all the ideas that were in my head, they would hate me. They would never want to talk to me. If you do it in book form, people are fine to sit down and read that for a couple hours. It must be my voice then, I guess. But
Sure.
I just, I'll be sitting around and I just have random ideas and I'm like, well, I could put that in a book, or how would that turn out? Or that's really weird. So it's not so much an inspiration thing. It's more just a lot like, yeah, just this would be cool. I want to see what this would do. Or occasionally I will have my fiance makes me tell this story. So Southern Cross is my vampire novel. And it came out of a conversation where I learned that there's a Confederate vampire in the Twilight series that is just kind of like, he's just kind of there. And it's like, decoration, Confederate vampire. And I was like, no, we're not doing the good guys, the Confederate vampire thing anymore. I'm gonna write a real Confederate vampire for you. And so, not to say it was necessarily one out of spite, but it was kind of in response to that idea of like, oh yeah, the Confederate vampire who's the charming, lovable protagonist of X, Y, and Z story. I just kind of was like, yeah, no, tired of that. Don't want any more of that.
Right.
So,
yeah, sure. Well, you get a lot of that. I was telling my son's 13. I mean, he's not into writing or anything, yet, maybe never, but he's super into like drawing, like comics and manga and things. And so he thinks about stories a lot, and he'll have really in-depth conversations with me. We'll sit and talk story and things. And so it's always interesting when I was telling like that's a lot of the stories come from exactly that. If you watch something and then it goes some other way and you're like, hey, what if it went this other way? What if this happened instead? So I think I was listening to something a little earlier about Tolkien, and they were talking about some of like his like responses to the different things, like how elves were treated and like dwarves. And I was like, oh, this is how they're shown wrong. We're going to do it this way. So.
Or on the other side, you have the fact that C.S. Lewis, when he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, the reason that there is a lamppost as the first thing that they all see when they come to Narnia for the first time is because Tolkien told them that you could not do a fantasy novel with a lamppost in it. Lewis was just like, okay, bet.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's another famous one, right? There's like, oh, what could you do? I think Hemingway had one where it was like, you can't write a story in some amount of letters or something, or some amount of words, and so he wrote some particular story with it. So I think it was something about shoes, like baby shoes or something. But yeah, so what did that? So with the writing like horror things like that, monsters, etc. I do have my Mothman monster up here, behind me. In fact, after I was born in Morgantown, West Virginia. So after the conference, we drove out to Morgantown, spent a couple of days there, and then we drove down to the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. So
how was it?
It was awesome. Yeah, it was a good time. Yeah, it's not real big. It's just kind of something to do for the afternoon. But I was born there, but we didn't spend much time there. So my knowledge of West Virginia is of an adult, even though I was, born there. I don't have any kid memories really there. So that was fun. I get to drive all around the state and go see Mothman. It is. Yeah. But so when you go about, like, what's the process like when you kind of want to mine that darkness to kind of create a book or a poem or whatever piece of art out of it? How's that process for you?
Generally, I find I pull the emotions of real world things that I, have experienced or I've seen other people experience or go through. And I try and find a way to transpose, not transpose. I try to find a way to kind of like lay that as the groundwork for whatever type of horror that I'm writing. So, you always hear the whole thing of that the original vampire stories came out of the fear of tuberculosis, and stuff like that. So a lot of my stories are Touched by Shadows in particular is the best example. And it's very much a story about race and identity and fitting in and being different. As a person of color, obviously I've experienced that, but I've also seen other people experience it in different ways. And I've tried to sort of draw on the different aspects of that to kind of translate it onto the horror that I was writing, sort of comparison of the existential dread of being sort of the outsider with the existential dread of giant tentacle monster that make Cthulhu look, shiny happy.
Sure. I hear that clearly. It's funny. It almost reminds me of I think the term is a method actor, where they go and they draw on their real world experience to get to wherever that character kind of needs to be. Actually, I hear it's a very American thing. I think British actors do something completely different, and they think we're silly. But I get that relationship, right? Because I think we talked about that a little at C3. Was how do you have a cosmic scale of something? But still keep it relatable and, emotional for the reader. So I think that's a brilliant way to go about it, is basing that in the real world emotions. And then, yeah.
And I think kind of with cosmic horror in particular, a lot of people focus on sort of the grandiosity of it. It's cosmic horror, it's big, it's macrocosms of stuff. But when you really boil down to it, if you go all the way back, the real horror, say Cthulhu or Azathoth or any of the other ilk in that vein, is less what they are, but more what they represent to an individual person. It's not so much you look at Cthulhu and he's so ugly you go crazy. It's, holy shit, this thing has been here since before stars existed, and I can do nothing to stop it. Like, I can't do anything about it. I am small and insignificant. And also, people probably aren't going to believe me if I'm like, yeah, there's a dragon with an octopus for a head that came out of this weird slimy rock in the ocean. They're going to put me in a friggin' mental hospital. Like, multiple years, this like personal fear that comes from the cosmic understanding.
Yeah. Right, sure. Well, and there is that existential dread, like you mentioned, the kind of the metaphysical kind of almost dread at times too. So I think it is interesting to kind of hit it out from that. Are there any dangers to like exploring that darkness, like to your mental, emotional health, like just psychologically, any dangers with diving into that?
So when I was writing Touched by Shadows, I learned very quickly that, it's a heavy topic, and I thought that I could sort of approach it with a healthy enough distance to convey it without letting it, get to me. And I failed miserably, actually.
Sure.
Part of what I've worked on in my writing is trying to keep it personal and, do that whole, like you said, method acting thing, but put enough distance between myself and what is going on in the story so that it does not sort of blend over into my, mental emotional state. I try to avoid the whole Jared Leto being the Joker on set and driving everyone crazy sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. I can see it. It's like, don't bring your work home with you. Yeah, almost. Why do you think you failed that first time? I failed it.
Inexperience, and because I was writing at a time of just very heightened passions and emotions, I sort of just let myself get carried away. I always joke that the first draft of Touched by Shadows was less of a story and more of me yelling angrily at the sky with a bit of a plot somewhere in there.
Sure.
I think the first draft of that was very much me just getting the emotions out, and then later on when I went back, I was able to look at it more clearly and pick out the places where I needed to be angry, but the places where I could pull back and have some breathing room for both myself and the readers.
Right. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I wonder if there's something with that too, is just your experience as a writer, like experience level, writing things. Because I know my first novel is But the Ripping Apart literary fiction. It's essentially about a single dad of two kids who has a bunch of issues and he's thrust into helping someone, and that's a hoarder. And so it was very like, there is a joke that every writer's first book is I can never say the word autobiographical.
Autobiographical. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to like slow myself down to try to get that one out. You know what my drama teacher taught me in high school. But that one was hard. I really struggled. There was days I brought that home with me because I had to kind of face all the times I'd failed. And the character Jack's actually I don't know if he's much worse, a worse version of what I was, and very fictionalized towards the end. But the first part of writing that, once I got to editing and he became a character that I was dealing with, it was a lot easier. But that first part, getting that down and kind of facing all the times I'd failed my kids, people and everything else.
Realizing that template had to come from somewhere, and you got that moment of like, oh crap.
Exactly. Like, okay, I need to make it worse than me so I can feel a tad bit better.
You can feel better about this, yeah.
Brief interlude from the show. As you've heard me say ad nauseum at this point, the very best way to support the show is to buy a book. You're hearing all about my guest work during the show, so now if you want to take a moment to watch a cinematic trailer of one of mine, I'd certainly appreciate it. And if you're intrigued and so inclined, we'll have links where you can pick yourself up a copy. Thanks again, and cheers.
Ms. Lyon's cancer was strewn blood-soaked across the floor, left to mutate into a labyrinth of torment, walled by festering mounds of trash and jagged memories. It was a wasteland of a lifetime of waste, unwasted, turned morbid graveyard where every tombstone read the same name. Yet somehow in the darkness there was an order to it all. Walls of trash resembled a vineyard ripe for harvest, and the stacks of books and newspapers, Grecian urns. Looking out the window, Jack could see Ms. Lyon's reflection, a skeleton with its head popping out of the grave, beaming. And Erica's reflection, a mourner at the grave, feigning happiness. Jack took a deep breath. The staleness of the air and the moldy smell in the room was becoming unbearable. And suddenly he felt the irresistible urge to bolt out of the house. Every time there was silence, it felt like the sands of death were pouring in upon him. In fact, he could taste them.
I was like, so I wondered that. So with that, how do you find the light, right? So if you're writing kind of dark things, how do you find that light that keeps you going for one, but then also kind of, and maybe you don't, find it for the reader, right? But is there also kind of giving it to the reader that they feel like, okay, I can keep going with this and it's not just, kind of maybe bleak. Although, bleak could be fine. I like some Greek tragedies and some of those are very bleak. So
Yeah, well, they're very dark. So I try and end my narratives in sort of the way that I guess I perceive the world, which is at the end of the so-called story, not everything works out necessarily for the best or even like in a happy way, but there is usually an idea of continuance. Something goes on beyond the story. So even if the story has, say, a sad ending, there is something still there that say, okay, this is not, final. There is a world, your other world than these, right? There's more to go on, and it can pick up after these characters if the reader wants to assume, they want to say, oh, well, this person died, but these people are still out there, and I want to say that they have a happy ever after. And I'm going to pretend that nothing terrible will ever happen to them after this. Not probably fine until I write a sequel and, kill off more of those characters. But I generally try and leave things not so much open-ended, but just a point of continuous. I don't believe that there is a finite end to any particular story.
Thanks, Bill. Sure. No, that makes a ton of sense. Look, beauty in the darkness. Is there something in there that kind of or maybe even just some some truth that it reveals?
I think this might sound a little morbid, but I think that every story at its core is a horror story, even if the horror exists and the potentiality of what can go wrong, there is horror. And I think that is a truth. And I think that it is not as bad of a thing that people would potentially make it out to be. I don't think that horror is inherently a darkness. So as I said, you have this idea of continuance, that things go on, but if every day of your life has some aspect of horror to it, every day you're also proving to yourself that you can keep going through that horror, right? That's kind of how I view that. But I also think that in sort of the metaphysical sort of idea, dread and terror and our place in everything, there is this catharsis from experiencing scary things in a safe environment. And go, yeah, this is horrible. This is one of the most screwed up things I've ever seen, but it's not happening to me. And I think that is a very big part of the human experience. And I think that when you can look at something and say, I can emotionally relate to this, even though it's not happening to me, I think that actually gets easy to translate it onto other people and their experiences. You can look at it and say, this is not happening to me, but I can emotionally connect with the fact that this person is, going through it. So I think there's a beauty in that connectivity, sort of an extended in the idea of horror.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you put that. I love that notion too, because I always think that what is magical about writing, like the written form, is when you read, you really have to kind of walk that mile in that character's footsteps. And it's not as, when we watch screens, it's there. I mean, there's kind of this weird wall between us, but when you read, you have to internalize it. You're bringing that in, very intimately.
You're conjuring those images in your head, and you are, you're more thrust into the setting than you are when you're just watching it. You are reading your way through Hill House, and you are as terrified as the characters, as opposed to, you're not there with, say, Sean, fighting zombies or.
Yeah, sure. So when you go about killing characters, she had brought that up, made the joke about killing off their favorite characters the next round. Do you just let the story kind of flow, and if it feels like that's the consequence that needs to happen that moment, that character's dying off, or is there any considerations you put around kind of killing a character?
I think the big thing for me is less when to kill a character and when not to kill them. I will do my best to never just kill a character for shock value. I don't think that is a fair delivery to the readers per se. And I know everyone gets up in arms like, oh, well, deaths happen randomly, and it is shock value, and that's perfectly fine. That's real life. But I'm writing fiction, and while fiction is meant to reflect aspects of real life, it is not real life. There's an invisible sort of railroad track that I'm guiding my readers down. But as far as killing characters, if I'm slowly becoming more of an outline kind of person, which is horrifying to every version of me previous to this year. So I do kind of preordain people dying now, as opposed to just letting it happen. But every now and then I'll just, if I'm writing and I'm like, no, this feels like a good place for this person to die, I will, kill them, ruin the entire rest of my outline, but to figure out what the hell I'm doing going forward. Anything for the sake of what's best for the story.
Yeah, that's funny. I had a few writers on. We do open bar segments of the show too. I'll mention it to you after the show. Once people are on, I mention it to them. But usually 3 or 4 writers come on, and then we talk more writing craft. I'm actually I like talking story craft. I like the nuances of stories and things. Writing craft, you should only say said and all these things, kind of bores me to tears. But I try to get back to the community when I can. So we'll cover things like tagging dialogue or whatnot on that. But when you talked about like killing off characters, and how to go about doing it, and it's interesting because one of the things is, like you said, it's like, people have like this great outline, and then as you start writing, it's like, oh well, now I'm crumbling this up, or I'm wiping the whiteboard clean, and I'm going to restart from here. So that's not it's not unusual. I think it's pretty special, actually. I think when people get too rigid, the one that it's a TV show example, and everyone gives me a hard time, so I always give TV show and movie examples, but that if we're being realistic, that's the cultural touch points. Now, it's probably even memes now. The younger generation, the cultural touch point is memes versus, versus the TV shows, but it was How I Met Your Mother. Did you ever watch that show?
I did, and I'm admittedly not much of a sitcom person.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. And anyone that doesn't want spoilers of the show, it's been off the air now for like 8 years. Tune out the next 30 seconds. But the whole story is, the conceit is, it's a guy telling his kids how he met their mom.
Right.
And then it gets to the very last episode where you meet the mom. You meet the mom, and then 30 seconds later, you find out that she's been dead the whole time. And the whole story is about he wants to get the kids permission to ask out their Aunt Robin, like his old flame. And this is 8 years into it, right? And it was, they said, and I looked it up after, because me and my wife liked the show, and then when it came, we're like, and actually it has one of the endings that people think is one of the worst, like in television history. And I kind of like looked it up, and I'm like, oh, the writers had plotted that to be the ending, but the show got way more popular than they thought. And so instead of being kind of a 3 or 4 year show, it goes to 8 years. And that lasted, to make it even worse, the last season was all about that Aunt Robin's getting married to another guy. The whole season set at their wedding. So you watch like, and then in the course of like 5 minutes, like that's all blown up, and it's just whiplash.
I would have been unhappy, to say the least.
Yeah, exactly. And we were. That's why sometimes I'll look these things up after. So I'm like, what the hell just went wrong here? But that's what reminds me of. They had that outlined, and I was probably fine when they outlined it. But then as the course of writing it, as the course of that evolution goes, we need to crumble this up.
And they needed to change it, and they didn't.
Yeah, so they stuck with it. So I applaud you for crumbling it up when the time comes. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken?
Like writing wise, or in general?
Wherever you want to take it.
I am a pretty risk averse person, honestly. I mean, I'd probably say asking out a girl who was, way above my league, and really hoping that it worked out.
Very good.
Well, 11 years later, so.
Yeah. No worries.
Skydiver, or not really much of a thrill junkie, so.
Right. No, that's fine. I think it's interesting because we talked a little about, failure earlier, just in the sense of like failing to keep that emotional distance, from the work. But I always think kind of risk and failure is kind of where you get to learn the most. So if I I happily share my failures mostly. But I've actually said on the show, I think the riskiest thing I've done writing wise is really, this should have been a time in my career where I was writing multiple novels and keeping to punching out work. And instead I took this time to write an epic absurdist satire. So,
you gotta write what you gotta write, right?
You gotta write, yeah. You gotta write what's in your heart at that moment. So here we are, but it wasn't the wise career, decision, but I always think it's interesting to kind of learn about them, kind of just where people have gone and things. So, and I applaud you. I also asked someone, my wife is 10 times, she's prettier than I am, smarter than I am, more stable than I am. I have no idea what I did in any capacity.
We should make t-shirts for this club, start finding other members.
Right. I like the joke that I'm the trophy husband. And so she, in fact, actually got me a hat that says trophy husband. Another shirt. It's just a t-shirt. She likes to dress up when I wear it, so it's even more absurd. But it says, it's not easy being my wife's arm candy, but I'm nailing it.
Yeah. Yeah,
she amuses me with it. But none of it's true, but she amuses me at least.
Stephanie will. Yeah, she'll always dress up. Put all the makeup on, put all the effort in, and like, are you ready? And I'm like, I'm here in my t-shirt and jeans, or t-shirt and cargo pants, and I'm like, yeah, let's go have everyone be like, why is she slumming it with this guy?
Right. I know they always think like that. He must really have something going on somewhere, and the truth is not really. He just trying to, just lucked out. I mean, not.
I do my best.
Very good. So then I wonder if we talked about a little with getting into the craft talk, like, and I should stop saying this before the show because I reveal the joke way too early, but with a name called Writers Drinking Whiskey, I'm ethically mandated to talk some writing. So writing craft talk, I think. So with writing, horror, is there like, and I don't know, maybe this doesn't even apply, to your work. So feel free if it doesn't, but there's like the jump scares, right? And you get like horror for like cinema and things, right? You have kind of that jump scare aspect. How do you write that into something, right? So, I mean, it's easy to see a movie, right? It's just literally it's called a jump scare because they're jumping out in front of the screen, right? But how do you capture that effect in the written form?
I don't think that you do, or at least not in the same capacity. Obviously, a jump scare's goal in a movie or a TV show is to startle and create this spike of adrenaline that then, it lasts and it makes everything around it, the buildup and the kind of deflation more tense. Because then what's going to happen next. I don't think that you can effectively make use of that in a written form. I think what you can go for is sort of an element shock or surprise where you've set this tension, you've set this scene, and the reader knows that something is coming. They know, they know the rules of your story. They know what can potentially be, and you throw something at them that is inside that scope, but not what they would have expected. And I think that gives that sort of almost that that gasp moment. And I don't think anyone is. I mean, I don't know, no judgment, but I don't think anyone is sitting reading a book and jumping when they read a certain word on the page. But I do think that you can shock and kind of, play on the tension that you as an author have built leading up to a revelation in your story.
Yeah, sure. What do you think? So, not to take a complete hard left here, but when you're talking earlier about the software engineer, I think was the title, right? Is with AI, right? So you keep hearing writers freaking out one way or the other. And I've had some writers on, like Ken Liu, I mentioned earlier, has some interesting thoughts on it. Dario Chariello, who's a pretty common guest on the show, has some different thoughts. They're a little more positive with it. How do you feel with the whole AI?
I have this. One of my friends sent me this meme, and it was like, if I hear one more person talking about AI, I'm gonna start punching people in the face. I am very much against the use of generative AI to create quote unquote art. I don't necessarily think it falls into the category of actual art. It is a assimilation. It is it's like you threw a bunch of paint in a blender, you blended it all up and threw it at a wall, and yes, my new modern art.
Sure.
I do think that a lot of people who are really freaking out, so to speak, about it, don't quite understand the limitations. And I think part of that is because we're being bombarded with so many different, statements on how powerful AI is and what it can do. And obviously I'm a software person, so when the whole ChatGPT thing came out, I screwed around with it a little bit and tried to see what it can do. And the answer is it's more confused about everything than people think it is. And it's also at the point now where it's putting out so much garbage that it's cannibalizing itself and it's generating crap off of its own crap, which makes it more immediately recognizable. I do think that we need to prepare for the evolution of AI and, work with legislators and different organizations to try and secure a foothold for the creative arts in the face of AI. But I do think that right now is less a time to panic and more a time to begin those preparations, and also to take the time to really understand what AI means at this point in time.
Yeah, I do feel like it's one of those things, they just slap that term on everything now. Because it's like AI, and I'm like, well, what's artificial intelligence about this? It's like,
Right.
it's a computer.
And I think, and I think the term AI is also kind of misleading, because when you think of AI, you think of, I don't know, like Haley Joel Osment, or that the one robot that Will Smith really didn't like in iRobot. You think of these kind of an idea of sentience or even sapience. I mean, it's a learning model. It's not actually making decisions per se, or it's not making decisions based off of a capacity that we consider actual intelligence. It is still ultimately a branching tree of options based on assimilated information. And I mean, you think of things like spell check, or, Grammarly there, or even like, the voice to text dictation, use something that is kind of an artificial intelligence. It listens to the sounds that you make, and it's like, they're probably saying based off of, a bunch of people who have said it to this learning program. So like AI in the capacity that we have it has been around a lot longer, I think, than people think. It's just that now it's a big tech throw keyword and you're seeing it everywhere. And Elon Musk took over Twitter and he's like, yeah, my robots can serve drinks, and they're actually people in robot suits or whatever. Yeah, I'm tired, but like I understand why people are upset. So I have to like rein that tired in, if that makes sense.
Sure. That's why I do think of that, like when I do the show and I do the captions. Usually I just go on and make sure everyone's name's right. And it's going to mess up other places, but I don't have the hours it would take to really try to make sure everything's perfect. So I'm like, whatever the robot thinks is mostly okay. I'll just make sure I get the names right. My name is never right. I think it's like, the best I get is William Our O-U-R Hennessy. That's the best. That's the closest I get.
Hennessy.
Yeah, I'll get Inky.
It fits with the writer drinking whiskey, though. I mean,
It does. I mean, that's where Hincy came from. Like, supposedly there was a William Hennessy in Ireland, 7 generations before me. So maybe it just knows my roots. It's like, this is the wrong name. You should actually be Hennessy. Your family screwed it up at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. Just the concept. I think AI is actually, as far as just people plugging it in, I think it's getting used now more than people realize. And because every time I look, and I show them to my wife sometimes, because they will be so ridiculous. Like you'll have a title to an article. It's like I forget what it was yesterday, but it's like 13 words long. You could tell it was finding synonyms for like liberal, because it was like a liberal did this, and then a Democrat, and then and you're just like, what has even happened? Why would I want to read this from this title? And there was a Sports Illustrated one that was really famous. They had AI reporters, but they were trying to say they were real people, and they were writing articles, and then it get caught because it was like one of the guys was promoting volleyball, and it was like, yeah, volleyball can get hard to get into if you don't have a net in the bowl. Oh no!
Yeah, I very much understand people's concerns and fear, but every time I look at something like that, when it comes to AI, I'm just like, no, we're not there. We're not there yet.
Yeah. It's premature.
Take a breath.
Yeah.
We're not there yet.
Right. Well, and if we I mentioned Dario earlier, his point was that at one point, like rugs, right, were all handmade. And then we started using machines for those, and most of our rugs are machine rugs. But then the handmade rug is really special now, and that it's coming. So, but that is still a billion years away. I mean, it's and I think there's always this thought, like there's just this natural progression. So where we are now, we will certainly be somewhere else, in 5 years. But that's not true. We haven't been to the moon in, what are we going on, 60 years? Yeah. So it's not always this. It just keeps going naturally, and everything's gonna be fine. It's
Life is not life is not a slippery slope. Okay. Clickety clack, clickety clack, tickety clack.
Bing. Oh, hello. You caught me right as I was putting the finishing touches on my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia. And now it is time for the long road to publication and the long editing process. As writers, we spend tons of time editing our work. The hardest part, I think, of the editing process is really like the proofreading, the copy editing, because you were so immersed in it. I've just spent 13 years immersed in Pirates, got it all together, went through, edited it front and back, by characters, all these different asymmetrical ways, and still it's going to have typos in it. And they're going to horrify me one day if I ever find those in the actual printed edition. The way I combat that is with EditGPT. You found today's sponsor. The link is on the screen now. I'm going to put it here. Here's the link. If you're on the podcast forum and you can't see me pointing up at that link, if you're on a podcast, you're really missing out. I'm really animated with my hands. But if you can't find it on there, feel free. You'll find it in the description. It helps support the show. It helps restock the bar. Helps keep this guy happy so that we can keep putting all these shows out there for all of you. Thanks for everything. Let's get back to the writing, because Pirates of Appalachia is not going to finish itself. The one thing EditGPT cannot do is save the file for you. So I'm going to make sure to save that now. So I want to get back to my work. You get back to your regularly scheduled programming. I think we've covered the writing talk. I think to the important part, are you ready for some shots?
I am indeed. I have been sipping on it all night.
Very good. I forgot to ask. You would think I'd be better at this hosting gig by now, but what are we drinking today?
So I have, I don't know if you can see, I have this Glenmorangie Tale of the Forest.
Oh, very cool.
This was a gift from one of my friends, one of my other writer friends. I believe it was maybe an engagement gift. But yeah, so it is a Highland single malt Scotch whiskey crafted from barley killed with woodland botanicals. Botanicals, that's the right way to say that. Very light, very good. It's surprisingly, I feel like it's very low heat, but it's very good.
Oh, very good. I'll have to try that out one of these days. Awesome. So you know the drill from when we did this at C3. So rapid fire questions. Yep. You need to drink that whole cup. No, I'm just kidding. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. What is the strangest, potentially self-incriminating thing you've Googled this week?
Probably how long does it take to drown somebody?
I like to watch, my wife's really into true crime. And I always laugh when I look at someone's Google history. I'm like, man, if these people were writers, like, you just have no chance. If someone and you're a writer, like, got murdered this week, they're looking at it like, this guy wanted to know. Someone just drowned. He was just looking it up. Who is the greatest scream queen?
Greatest scream queen. I am a really big fan of Jenna Ortega right now, actually. She's really good in the Scream movies. Scream queen.
Very good. I haven't watched the newest. Oh, I used to love horror movies, but then I think none of our kids got into them. They like some scares and things, but none of them got into it. So I'd gotten out of like watching them. So I'll have to check those out one of these days. Freddy, Jason, or Ash? Who you got?
Oh man, it's not fair. It's Freddy, because he has the weird cosmic powers. But if we're being, ridiculous, Ash wins, I think, by pure bullshit powers. So that's pretty much how Evil Dead goes. So
the power of bullshit compels you.
It's like, putting anyone against Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny wins because he just defies the rules. Like, he exists to break the rules.
Very good. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
So I used to read a lot more, and I still do every now and then. Chuck Wendig has his blog, Terrible Minds, and he has a line that he repeats fairly often. He says that all writing advice is bullshit, which also makes it fertilizer. So, this idea of take it, use it if it works for you. If it doesn't, then it doesn't matter.
Right. That's a brilliant way to think of it, actually. Because it is kind of, everything's kind of bullshit. But it gets you to think about something. You might, go from there. What's the worst piece of advice?
Writing something that blends a lot of genres is going to be hard to market, so maybe focus on something else.
Well, yeah, that's terrible advice. I don't know. Like, usually you would get like one of the things that I think gets, because I guess everything is, well, I don't know. That one sounds truly terrible, but I guess everything can be terrible or good, and like however you look at it. But the one that people throw around all the time now is like, you just take a trope and twist it and take it some different way, right? And just like that's the key to all writing. But that's kind of what genres, like, to some degree, what blending genres is taking something and twisting it in a new way. So I don't know why you would think that. So I'm glad you didn't listen to them.
Pretty stubborn.
Favorite, yeah, very good. Favorite fictional monster?
Godzilla, hands down.
Godzilla's a
OG.
Awesome. And finally, the last one for our shots section here. Favorite podcast, and why is it Writer Shaking Whiskey?
Because most podcasts do not actually give me the opportunity to drink whiskey while I'm talking to the person running the podcast. Cheers.
Cheers. All right. Thank you for that. So then I think we can move on. Did you have something you could read for us today?
I do. I managed to find it in my late list.
No worries. You're not supposed to say it. No one would ever know. It's beyond the veil.
I like to own up to my mistakes. Makes me feel better about myself and the puppy.
Very good.
So I'm going to be reading a little bit from Up from the Deep. I do this thing. I think it's fun and clever where I write a few chapters from the perspective of my main monster in the novel. So yeah, this is one of those chapters. Hunger, gnawing, scraping, clawing. She feels it, not just hers, but her children's. Throbbing, scared, alive. She needs to feed. Her skin burns from the tiny creature's fire, but that will fade. The pain always fades. The hunger will not. Her mate calls out to her, and she regards him warily. She called him to her, but hungry. Food. She feels herself begin to salivate. That hunger. She lets out a weak cry in response to his. He seems confused. He can't feel the hunger, can he? She feels the children on her back, so close, so ready to burst into the sunlight and feel the warmth. And the hunger. Tiny hungers. Mate calls out again. Concern or a threat? Her children demand protection. She rises to her full height, looking down at them. His taste teasing her tongue and flicks the air. Pleasure courses through her. Food. She moves closer, and he slides closer as well, not against her, smelling so edible. She can barely resist. Why should she resist? Eat me, her meal sounds, or is that just her desire? Eat him, her children say, or is she just hungry? She leans down, nipping at his wing playfully. Delicious, wanting more. Her meal pulls away, looking up at her. He's confused. The food is confused. She goes down for other taste, but he moves out of reach, eyeing her suspiciously. He knows. Her meal is running away with itself. Rage. She screams, stretching wings dormant longer than she can remember, and feels powerful. Her meal backs away, trembling, but then steadies, stretching his own wings and roaring with indignation. She lashes out at him, her massive claw tearing to the meat of his shoulder. Warm blood. Instinctively, she springs her neck forward, latching onto the fresh wound. The taste is exhilarating. She hears her meal scream, and that only serves to invigorate her more. The pleasure pulls her in. Just a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I really love that, actually. I love it when you can take something and look at it from like the different kind of point of view of it. So
a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, exactly. I remember doing that. There was I was going through when I was writing Pirates, and there's kind of 4 different pillars to that novel. And I went through and edited each one by the kind of group of characters that was there. And because I did it like that, at one point, it for me got a little tedious being in this one character's point of view all the time. I don't like, because it's chapters away, probably never for the reader, but for me it did. And there's the dog that's with him, and I'm like, oh, what if I did this one from the dog's point of view? And like got this information out, and then I just tried to find every stupid dog pun I could find, like every movie reference and dog like reference I could fit into her thinking. So
As long as the dog survives, you can do whatever you want.
that's true. That's true. Awesome. So thanks for that. So I wondered then, so what's next for you as a writer?
So I recently signed a contract to write another creature feature. I actually don't know how much I can say, so I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay.
I'm working on that. And then obviously next year I have Southern Cross coming out. There is a little something else with that, I believe, as well. So and I'll be cryptic because no one's told me what I can and can't say, and I don't want to spoil the surprise.
Okay. Very good. Awesome. Thanks for that. And so then I like to say it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. What's one thing, maybe not even one thing, but in what ways has writing impacted your life that you don't think you would have gotten otherwise?
Writing has definitely freed me to better explore the things that scare me. And I think without writing, I would not be as capable of processing a lot of those things.
Sure. Amen. Thank you for that. Yeah, there is that control, right? You get to control those worlds since they can reconfigure your fears or whatever else, traumas, whatever else is going on. So, amen. Thank you for that. Thank you so much, for coming on. If people want to learn more, I did find your website, so I can link that up. Is there anywhere else you would direct them to?
My Instagram is probably where I post the most now. That's Madness and Monsters. There's the words, but same as my website otherwise. I try to post there fairly often, but time will pass and I will not have. I had a newsletter. It died again. So,
sure.
And Instagram, the best place if you want to follow up me more frequently. My website will be updated as I have new things to put on it. So
there we go. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And thanks again for coming on. It was a real pleasure getting to spend a little longer chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. I love this whole setup.
Hey everybody, thanks again for tuning into the show. It was a blast as always. Don't forget to head over to Substack to check out Pirates of Appalachia. This week we have chapter 3 for you, Ones and Zeros, where we meet a disenfranchised genius named Brick Breaker, named after the game Brick Breaker. And he's going to work in the corporate environment of the future in his commuter shaft and is quite miserable and is really wanting to reconnect with his son who was sent away mysteriously to Tall School. So check it out. It is a beginning of a really interesting, fun, and I think at the end, very heartwarming and humanity affirming art. And if you just want to stick here and watch more Writers Drinking Whiskey, the AI overlords have chosen a video for you. You can choose to watch it, or you could choose to watch a different video, whatever you like, because you're the one with the agency, but they're the one with all the data. So, and this is what the data says. So check that out. If not, either way, thanks so much everybody for your support, your continued support and being here all these years. It's been a blast and will continue to be one. So, as I like to say, because I'm British, not really. Cheers, everybody.